Shall we ever get rid of Marx? He's always there for some curious reason. His predictions were wrong. The mechanism he described of a capitalist system is not the right one. And despite that, people still quote him, and people use his method, as they say. And especially now, today, in the English departments of some American universities, they are Marxist to show that they have their heart on the left side. And so I would like to hear from all of you later what your explanation is of the continuity of Marx, of the happy birthday, Karl Marx, that we've heard before. My feeling is, first, he was a powerful thinker and a masterly writer when he wasn't writing Hegelian prose. Or it could be that when he wrote Hegelian prose, because it's so important to be obscure so that you have a good name, maybe that also helped. Secondly, I think that he still has a great deal of name because he created a religion. Many people have said this, a religion with dogmas, heresies, excommunications. And then thirdly, and this may be the more important one at present, thirdly is historical materialism and the philosophy of the world whereby changes come from technology, from science, and he never asked himself who the technologues were and how they discovered these things. The Communist Manifesto now has been published 170 years ago, and it's the most innovative of sales brochures of scientific socialism. It's the most read, I should say. It's a very good read, and it has an inner logic that made people sit up. Then he developed it in Das Kapital and so on, but I think the Communist Manifesto is a good way to enter the philosophy of Karl Marx. Engels and Marx had started a league in Europe, the Communist Corresponding Society, and so Engels met the people of a London secret communist society, the League of the Just. By the way, just is so misused. What is just? And why should the League be of the Just unless what you want is to have absolute equality in everything? But anyhow, the League of the Just asked Marx and Engels to write a manifesto, and this is a manifesto that was published in 1848. Now, it was published just before the 1848 revolution. And that revolution was spread all over Europe. And for 3 years or so, even in Germany, not so much in Switzerland from what we heard yesterday, but in other places, the revolution was spreading like wildfire. And that revolution, it looked as if it was going to win. But in the end, they were able to shut it down. And this revolution is the first of the big attempts by the socialists to have a change in the system. Then came what happened with the Commune de Paris in 1871. That was again snuffed out. And then again, it was in 1917 when it was lucky in Russia. Now, Engels helped Marx to write this pamphlet. And one has only to compare the notes that Engels gave Marx so as to write this pamphlet and the pamphlet itself. Here we see Marx as a wonderful writer of slogans, a wonderful prose writer, which impressed so many people with the hope that we could change the system. I remember the phrase with which it starts: a spectre haunts Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the spectre. the Pope and the Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. It's a bit exaggerated, the spectral claim, because there was such a small bunch of people, but anyhow, it started the pamphlet beautifully. And it put some spirit in the people who were socialists or communists because they wanted to do away with private property. The beginning of this pamphlet was in chapter 1, the history of all existing society is a history of class struggle. And in past history, there were many classes, but in the 19th century, after the Napoleonic Wars, what you had is two classes, they said. One was the workers, the people, and the other was the bourgeois. And dividing society into two classes has, he said, simplified class antagonisms. Society as a whole is dividing itself increasingly into two great hostile camps, into two great social classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And this is very important in what I want to say, because I want to see what the model was behind this book, this pamphlet, and Das Kapital, a series of revolutions in technology and the modes of production of exchange has caused this split into two classes. The idea he was proposing a sociology of change. It wasn't people who changed it. It wasn't inventors or scientists. No, it was something spontaneous in the capitalist system, whereby somebody invented something, and we don't know how they invented it, and introduced it in their factories, and somehow this was automatic, and that changed history. The idea of a revolution caused by history, by the laws of society, that revolution has gone into our language, and we speak of the Industrial Revolution. Why the Industrial Revolution? It's not a revolution, but he used that word revolution to call the attention of people who were reading him, because there'd been the French Revolution and then other upheavals in 1830, and so calling it the Industrial Revolution was something that caught the attention of everyone. Now, here comes one of those paradoxical turns of phrase that must have shocked so many of his fellow revolutionists. He says, I quote, "The bourgeoisie has played in history an eminently revolutionary role." Well, that must have shocked the bourgeoisie itself, and certainly many other people who were fighting it. "The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby revolution the relations in production, and with them all society. So it's technology that changes society, and we don't know where technology comes from. So the capitalist class had torn through the fabric of traditional societies, and now was in the process of creating a globalized economy and of huge productive forces. And here comes a text that really is surprising, must have surprised his friends, the socialists. The bourgeoisie, and we heard this last night, the bourgeoisie during its class rule of scarce 100 years has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding years together. Subjection of nature to the force of man, the extensive use of machinery, the application of chemistry to industry and manufacture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing the whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment of such productive forces slumbered in the womb of social labor? The phrase is strong, and even You even have a sexual metaphor with a womb there. What made the Communist Manifesto such a stirring piece of political propaganda is its description of an automatic moving mechanism in capitalist society and its forecast, its historical prediction based on that. So for Marx, capitalism had unleashed powers that took on an independent life, and this is something I want to underline today. An independent life and turned against the very system of private property on which it was based. So here was a contradiction in capitalism. On the one hand, you had the forces unleashed by the bourgeoisie, and those forces, because large companies ate the small ones, and slowly there was a monopolistic system, those forces were undermining the private property on which the whole system was based. So two things that he thought was brought and was sadly brought by capitalism was, on the one hand, the competition, and secondly, the division of labor. He thought that competition was like warfare. In fact, competition is a way of collaborating. And secondly, the division of labor destroyed the appetite of men to be all sorts of things. And he has a very interesting comment on this in the 1955 work of the German ideology. Now, in the German ideology, Karl Marx and Engels, because they wrote it together, imagined what it would be like to live under communism, without private property and without competition and without division of labor. Now I'm going to quote a phrase which is very striking in this German ideology. One exclusive sphere of activity, but each nobody would have one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes. Society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow. To hunt in the morning, to fish in the afternoon, to rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have in mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic. Now, I don't know whether to laugh or to cry at such an impossible system. In fact, our system is based on specialization. And the fact that he wanted to be against specialization so that people were humane and broad, indicates the wrong ideal that he was putting before his other communists and before society. Now, this pamphlet of the Communist Manifesto was written at the wrong time, because it was written just after what was called the Hungry 40s. From around 1835 to around 1855, there was a time when the working class that was going into the cities and taking part in huge factories was having a very rough time, especially because of health. There was cholera, and there was also tuberculosis, because so many people were put together there. And this is the moment when Engels saw the situation of the working class in Manchester. He was a factory owner, and he saw this. And Marx and him thought that this was going to be the capitalist system forever and ever worse. But around 1855, the situation of the working class changed fundamentally. From 1856 to 1873, GDP per man hour grew by an annual 1.3% in real terms. And wages increased. A study shows that they grew by 38% from 1851 to 1881. And then there was a lot of changes. First, the cycles got dampened. They were not the cycles that you had in 1830 to 1832. And also, there was a change in politics. with an increase in the number of voters going to the workers in cities, being able to vote and change the situation. So there was parliamentary reform and growth in productivity. This was something that they didn't foresee, though they were trying to discover the laws of capitalism, didn't foresee, and of course it made for people in England not to become socialists, but to use the trade unions as trade agreements and not as a way of subverting society. So the hungry 40s were, as I say, the wrong time to write this book. Now, what was implied in this and what was developed in Das Kapital? First, the man was alienated and he wanted a new man that was not alienated, as we just heard in the German, in the German ideology. Then the economic system was automatic. It wasn't that somebody invented something and was used. It was like a sort of perpetuum mobile. When under socialist, the system would grow and function alone. Nobody would have to take any decisions, and you could be a fisherman in the morning and a critic after dinner, because curiously enough, people became like rentiers under socialism. They didn't have to specialize, and the system worked on its own once you got rid of private property. Now, the question here is, why did it happen in Scotland and England? Why was this transformation then? It could have been, or should have been, really in France. And France, from the point of view of technology, was far ahead, as we can see in the Encyclopédie. But the trouble with the French productive system, it was directed at the king and the nobility. And they didn't want to have mass production. They had good quality production because that's what the nobility and the monarchy wanted. So here we have this strange idea that the capitalist system could work on its own. He says, yes, technology changes everything, but who's invented the technology? Who's put it into force? And this is something that is very wrong with Marxism. And then there's the materialist interpretation of history. The idea of Marx here, and especially in Das Kapital, was that economies only grew if you pressed the surplus value out of the workers and used that and accumulated the surplus value to create the machinery. Now, this is not so, because capitalism is really in an opinion and a spiritual way of organizing society. I'm remembering now Deirdre McCloskey when she says it's the bourgeois spirit, first in Holland and then in England, that was able, because the institutions were that way. In Holland, there were a republic. In England, because they could create factories outside cities, and they were not governed by laws then. These are the facts that made what is called the Industrial Revolution, and not the fact that you had more technological advance, which you did have in France. So here we have the capitalism in history is not the way that the Marxists tried, and not the way that the communists in the Soviet Union did it, which was first by forcing people into large factories and then extracting the surplus value to invest it for further growth. And here we then have that Marx is greatly valued by people who want equality of resources, as in Venezuela or in Cuba. Then the Social Democrats who want equality of opportunity, not freedom of opportunity. So this pamphlet, so well written, which caught the attention of so many people and is still read today, this pamphlet really was a poison in capitalist society, and we've grown over it by not thinking that growth is automatic and brought out by the extraction of surplus value, but is something that depends on people, on entrepreneurs, and on inventors. Thank you very much.